So in 2025, 5 tech companies spent $400 billion building physical machines to basically think for us.
Right.
But then in that exact same year, 70% of the human race decided they no longer trust their neighbors enough to, solve basic problems.
It's wild.
It really is. Like, think about that divergence for a second. We are spending just historic amounts of capital to build a planetary brain.
Yeah.
While our actual societal body is completely forgetting how to function at all.
It is honestly the defining contradiction of this decade. I mean, we're attempting to run 21st century planetary scale software on tribal scale evolutionary hardware.
Right, and the hardware is failing.
Completely failing.
Welcome. You're listening to a deep dive into what is arguably the most critical dynamic shaping our world today.
Yeah.
And if you're tracking global trends, you're constantly evaluating threats.
Sure. You're looking at AI capabilities. You're looking at climate models.
Exactly. Watching the debt markets, all of that. But today, we're unpacking a framework from a really fascinating document. It's an excerpt titled Metabolic Mismatch, the Thinning of Planetary Absorption Capacity.
Yeah, from the Today's Pulse Field Notes Signal collection.
Right. And this source material argues that hunting for a single spectacular crisis is just, well, it's the wrong approach entirely.
It is, because the real threat isn't a specific event, like a sudden crash. It is a systemic failure of absorption.
And what's fascinating here is that the authors, they refuse to frame the current moment as this dramatic apocalyptic collapse, right?
Yeah, and they don't view it as some utopian technological breakthrough either.
Right. They just classify what we're experiencing right now as a signal. Just a signal.
Exactly. And that signal is a systemic infrastructural inability to, well, digest the velocity of the world around us.
Digest it.
Yeah. It's not about the volume of things happening to us. It's about our underlying capacity to actually process those things.
Okay, I want to push back on this premise right out of the gate, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because, I mean, innovation has always caused massive friction, right?
Sure. Historically, yeah.
Like, you look back at the Industrial Revolution, or, I don't know, the shift from horses to cars.
The printing press is another good one.
Exactly, the printing press. People were completely overwhelmed then, too. The sheer velocity of change during the telegraph era terrified society.
They thought it was the end of the world.
Right. So the metabolism of the world had to adapt. And it did. So why are the authors so convinced that this time represents a terminal mismatch, rather than just, standard painful growing pains that we'll eventually adjust to?
Well, that's the crucial historical distinction, and the text actually addresses the mechanics of this directly.
Okay, how so?
So, during the Industrial Revolution, or the rollout of the telegraph, the scale of change was profound, obviously, but it was largely localized.
Geographically constrained.
Exactly, at least initially. A factory disrupted a town. A railroad disrupted a region. Society had these geographic and temporal slack zones, buffer zones, where the shock waves could kind of dissipate over time.
Like dropping a pebble in a pond, the ripples eventually fade out.
Exactly. But what the authors are identifying now is a synchronization of scale and velocity that just eliminates all buffer zones. We are talking about global systems that are instantaneously connected.
Right, like a shock to a semiconductor plant in Taiwan.
Instantly ripples into auto manufacturing in Germany.
Which instantly alters labor dynamics in Mexico. There's no delay.
There's no delay, and there's no localized containment.
So basically, the organism doesn't have time to rest between meals.
That's a great way to put it.
If we look at this biologically, let's unpack this analogy. Metabolism is a very specific sequence of events, right?
Yes.
You take something in, you break it down into its component parts, you extract the useful energy or nutrients, and then you expel the waste.
That's the basic biological function.
Right. If you eat a massive Thanksgiving dinner in 5 minutes.
That's a terrible idea.
Right. The problem isn't that the food is toxic. The problem is your body just can't metabolize it that fast.
Exactly.
So if any part of that sequence fails, you don't just feel full, you get systemically sick. The organism becomes toxic. Are we basically looking at a societal stomachache here?
Yeah, we are. And what's brilliant about this framework is that it takes that strict biological reality and applies it directly to our physical and social infrastructure.
Okay, so moving from the body to the grid.
Right. The text groups things together that we normally keep separate. So institutions, human bodies, trust networks, and energy grids.
That's a weird grouping. Why put trust networks and energy grids in the same bucket?
Because they all follow the laws of thermodynamics and systems theory.
Wait, really?
Think about it. A power grid takes in raw voltage, steps it down through transformers, distributes the useful energy, and grounds the excess waste.
Okay, that sounds like metabolism.
It is. So when a grid can't metabolize a sudden surge in demand, what happens?
It blows a transformer. The lights go out. Okay, so applying that socially. When a local community gets hit with a massive economic shift, it has to metabolize that event.
Yes.
It has to take in the reality, break it down into actionable steps, extract new opportunities, and expel the waste, which, I don't know, might be outdated economic models.
Or even the collective grief of the community.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. But if the changes happen at the speed of an algorithm rather than the speed of human sociology,
the community's transformer blows.
man, that makes so much sense.
It blows. And the resulting darkness is what we call burnout, or institutional gridlock, or political extremism.
Which really shifts how we view the daily news cycle.
It completely changes it. And this is vital for understanding our own individual experiences, too. Because when we talk about burnout today, the cultural narrative frames it as a personal failure, right?
Right, like, oh, you just need better time management.
Exactly, or you need more mindfulness, or here's a new productivity hack.
It always feels a little insulting when you're completely underwater.
Totally. But viewed through this metabolic lens, your personal burnout is just a micro-expression of a macrosystemic failure.
Right. You are a biological entity with a nervous system that evolved to metabolize the complexity of, like a hunter-gatherer tribe.
Right.
And now you're trying to metabolize an unnatural velocity of global information, localized tragedies, macroeconomic anxieties, all at once.
Yes. Your inability to digest it all isn't a weakness. It is a structural mathematical mismatch.
Which is incredibly validating to hear.
It is nice to let yourself off the hook a bit.
Yeah, but it also means we can't just, meditate our way out of this.
No, definitely not.
We have to look at the actual inputs straining the system. And to do that, the report takes us through 5 specific domains: digital infrastructure, climate, the economy, social trust, and the human response.
Right, setting the table for exactly what we're trying to digest.
So let's start with our biggest, hungriest new invention: artificial intelligence.
This is where the abstract idea of a metabolic mismatch becomes violently physical.
Very physical. The source material is very explicit here. It states that AI is no longer just a symbolic event.
Right. It's not just a philosophical debate about consciousness or job replacement anymore.
Right. The report calls it an infrastructural appetite.
And that phrase is so intentional.
I want to dig into the mechanics of that appetite, because we use this word all the time, the cloud.
Which is such a misleading term.
It is a brilliant piece of marketing because it implies something weightless, right? Ethereal, invisible.
It just floats above us, magically storing our photos and generating text.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting. The reality is that the cloud is heavily tethered to the Earth. The authors firmly root it in dense, heavy realities: copper, water, land, substations, and local political resistance.
Let's look at the numbers the text provides from the International Energy Agency, the IEA.
Oh yeah, these numbers are staggering.
In 2025, data center electricity use didn't just grow, it surged globally. Surged. And the capital expenditure, the CapEx, from just 5 large tech companies exceeded $400 billion in that single year.
400 billion.
With a B.
With a B. And with a projected 75% increase heading into 2026.
Okay, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that $400 billion in CapEx isn't software development.
No, it's not.
It's not paying software engineers to write better code. That is poured concrete. That is structural steel. That is physical terraforming just to support digital compute.
Precisely. It represents one of the fastest diversions of physical resources in modern history. To understand the metabolic strain here, we really have to look at the thermodynamics of what those data centers actually do.
Let's unpack that, because it's not just a big hard drive.
Far from it. When you are training a large language model, you're running tens of thousands of GPUs at maximum capacity for months at a time.
Just constantly humming. Constantly. The energy density of a modern AI server rack is astronomical compared to traditional cloud storage. And when you consume that much electricity, you generate an equivalent amount of heat.
Which brings us to the water.
Right. Because you cannot just use traditional air conditioning to cool these facilities.
It's not like turning on the AC in your living room.
No, the heat density is way too high. You have to use evaporative cooling systems.
And those take a lot of water.
Millions of gallons. These systems pull water, often from local municipal supplies or underground aquifers, run it through the facilities to absorb the heat, and then evaporate it.
Wait, so the water evaporates into the atmosphere? It's gone.
It is largely consumed, yes, meaning it does not immediately return to the local watershed.
So if you're listening to this on a smartphone right now, the data pulling this audio is passing through a massive, windowless warehouse spanning hundreds of acres.
Almost definitely.
It's relying on thick cables of copper that take a decade to permit and mine. And it might be actively draining the water table of a town you've never even visited.
And this is exactly where the metabolic mismatch triggers local resistance.
Because towns notice when their water starts disappearing.
Exactly. Think about a local town council, municipal zoning laws, community trust networks. These civic structures were designed to metabolize slow, predictable growth.
Right, like a new housing development.
Right.
Or maybe a new manufacturing plant opening up over 2 years.
Yes. They were absolutely not built to process a hyperscale infrastructural tsunami moving at the speed of software development.
But, okay, to be completely fair to the other side of this argument, because we want to look at both sides here, these tech companies aren't just building these for fun.
No, they have a massive incentive.
Right. There is a huge counter-argument that this capex is entirely justified. Proponents argue these data centers bring high-paying jobs, massive tax revenues to local municipalities.
And, more importantly, they argue that this level of compute is the only way we're going to solve the other existential crises we face.
Exactly. The argument is, yes, AI takes energy and water now, but it will eventually design the next generation of zero-emission fusion reactors.
Yeah.
Or hyper-efficient agricultural systems.
We are spending energy to invent our way out of the energy crisis. That's the pitch.
Exactly.
That is the accelerationist perspective, and to be clear, it is a powerful driver of global markets right now.
Very powerful.
And the source material does not dispute that possibility. It doesn't say AI will definitely fail at that.
Okay, so what is the problem then?
What it highlights is the temporal lag, the mismatch in timing.
The metabolism timing.
Exactly. Even if AI eventually solves climate change, the physical resources it is consuming right now are straining local ecosystems today.
Ah, right.
The town council cannot pay its current water deficit with future AI breakthroughs. The local grid cannot absorb a current brownout with a promise of future fusion. The metabolic strain is happening in the present tense.
Which provides the perfect and honestly unavoidable transition into the next area the authors explore, the planet itself. Because when evaporative cooling systems in AI data centers are pulling millions of gallons of water from a local aquifer, that water is leaving the agricultural table.
It's a direct connection.
The digital strain bleeds directly into the biological reality, and this is where the text demands a radical shift in how we view the climate.
It really does. For decades, climate change has been treated as a backdrop.
Like the scenery on a stage.
Yes. The global economy was the play, geopolitical conflict was the main character, and the climate was just the painted scenery behind the actors that was slowly changing color over time.
But the scenery is now actively participating in the play.
It's knocking over the actors.
Exactly. The authors cite a joint warning from the FAO and the WMO, that's a Food and Agriculture Organization, and the World Meteorological Organization.
A very serious joint warning.
Yeah. They state that extreme heat is now a critical, present-tense threat to agri-food systems. We're talking crops, livestock, fisheries, and forests.
It affects the livelihoods of more than 1 billion people right now. Not in 2050. Now.
And the phrasing the authors use here is critical. They describe marine heat waves, droughts, unsafe outdoor labor conditions, and crop yield stress, not as isolated meteorological events.
Right. They don't say there's a drought here and a heat wave there.
No, they call it pressure moving through the food body of the planet.
Pressure moving through the food body of the planet. It's incredibly evocative.
It forces you to stop looking at the Earth as like a static rock with some dirt on it.
Right.
And instead, you have to view it as a contiguous, living, biological entity experiencing systemic vascular strain, like human blood pressure.
That vascular analogy is highly accurate. Think about how biological shock cascades through a body.
Okay.
If you experience severe trauma in one area, your body reroutes blood flow to protect vital organs, right?
Yeah, that's basic physiology.
This causes secondary failures. Your kidneys might shut down not because they were directly injured, but because the systemic pressure altered their operating environment.
They lost their blood supply because the body was panicked.
Exactly.
So when we see a marine heat wave in the Pacific, we shouldn't just think, oh, that's bad for the local fisheries in that one spot.
No, we need to view it as a systemic spike in the planet's vascular pressure.
High blood pressure for the Earth.
Exactly. That heat wave alters ocean currents, which then shifts precipitation patterns over the American Midwest,
Which causes crop failures.
which forces farmers to pump more groundwater.
Which further depletes the aquifers that are already being strained by the local data centers we just talked about.
Yes. The pressure moves through the body.
Wow. It's all entirely connected.
And just like a human body experiencing prolonged vascular strain, the planet's ability to absorb additional shocks decreases to near zero.
The buffer zones are gone.
If your cardiovascular system is operating at maximum capacity just to keep you alive, you cannot metabolize the additional stress of running a marathon. You will collapse.
Right, you'd have a heart attack.
The planetary agri-food systems are currently operating without any slack. There are no buffer zones left. So a localized drought is no longer a localized problem. It becomes a systemic heart attack for the global food supply.
That is genuinely terrifying, and it makes you realize if the planetary body is running a fever and experiencing this level of vascular strain, it completely changes how we view human institutions.
It has to.
Mainly global markets. Because a sick body cannot produce. It cannot work efficiently. Which brings us to the third domain the source material examines, the economy.
Right. With the digital brain demanding infinite energy and the physical body running a fever, how does our circulatory system, the economy, handle the strain?
Well, the authors use a very precise term to describe the macroeconomic environment. They don't just call it uncertain.
No, uncertainty is normal in economics.
Right, or volatile. They call it shock saturated.
Shock saturated. We really need to unpack the mechanics of that word.
Yeah, what does saturation actually mean in this context?
To understand saturation, we have to look at how an economy normally functions. A healthy global economy acts like a highly optimized, just-in-time supply chain. It relies on predictability.
Okay.
When a shock happens, say a natural disaster closes a major port, the system has built-in mechanisms to adapt. Ships are rerouted, alternative suppliers are tapped, central banks might adjust interest rates to provide some liquidity.
Basically, the system absorbs the shock.
It metabolizes it.
But the text cites the IMF's April 2026 outlook here, and it projects a really sluggish 3.1% global growth rate.
Very sluggish.
And it lists a cascade of concurrent pressures. It says the economy is in the shadow of war, broader conflict, trade tensions, geopolitical fragmentation, and massive public debt.
Right. And when you layer all of those structural pressures on top of one another simultaneously, the system loses its elasticity.
Because it's fighting too many fires at once.
Exactly. Think of a just-in-time supply chain that has already optimized away all of its warehouse inventory to save money.
Right. There's no backup stock.
None. There is absolutely no slack in the system. If one port closes now, you don't just delay shipments. The entire manufacturing line on the other side of the world grinds to a halt.
Because the sponge is full.
The sponge is completely full. A shock-saturated economy is one where the buffer zones, whether that's central bank balance sheets, government debt capacities, or corporate profit margins, are completely depleted. It cannot absorb a single additional surprise.
But the most revealing part of this section, I think, is a very specific juxtaposition the authors make.
The one about AI?
Yeah. They list those traditional threats, war, trade tensions, public debt, right next to a completely novel threat. They call it disappointment over AI-driven productivity.
This is where all the domains begin to just collide.
Right, because we just discussed spending $400 billion on AI to fix our complexities.
The entire justification for that massive extraction of physical resources and the ensuing strain on the planetary food body is the promise that AI will trigger a historic boom in global productivity.
We are essentially banking on AI to be the miracle drug that cures the sluggish 3.1% growth rate and pays off the massive public debt.
We are.
So what does this all mean if that doesn't happen? If that investment doesn't yield productivity, does that become the very shock that breaks the saturated economy?
That is the big question. And this brings up something economists call the Solow productivity paradox.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Yeah, back in 1987, the economist Robert Solow famously quipped, "You can see the computer age everywhere, but in the productivity statistics."
Right, because the computers didn't instantly make us faster.
Exactly. It took decades for the invention of the personal computer to actually show up as measurable macroeconomic growth.
Yeah.
Because businesses had to fundamentally reorganize how they worked to take advantage of the technology.
Okay, so applying that to today, we are deploying AI everywhere. We have chatbots, we have automated code generation, we have AI summarizing our meetings.
But are we actually more productive?
Well, if we are just using AI to automate the creation of more emails, or to generate more synthetic data that humans still have to spend time reading and verifying,
Which is exactly what's happening.
then we aren't actually increasing systemic productivity, we're just increasing the velocity of the noise.
Precisely. Automating a task is not the same as automating a system.
Wow, yes.
If the productivity gains from this technology are delayed by a decade, or if they only yield marginal improvements rather than revolutionary ones, the economic fallout is catastrophic.
Because we've already spent the money.
We have placed a multi-hundred-billion-dollar bet using borrowed money and borrowed ecological resources. If that bet disappoints, it becomes the specific shock that breaks the saturated economy.
It is incredibly reminiscent of the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis.
It really is.
In 2008, the entire global financial system bet its elasticity on a single, unproven mechanism. The idea that bundled subprime mortgages could somehow mitigate risk entirely.
And we know how that turned out.
Right. And today, we are betting the ecological and economic elasticity of the planet on the unproven mechanism that generative AI will outpace the resource deficit it is actively creating.
And look, we aren't taking sides here on whether AI will ultimately succeed or fail. It might be the miracle we're hoping for.
It's true.
But the structural fragility is undeniable. The capital is spent. The water is evaporated. The debt is accrued.
It's a massive gamble. And when a macro system is that fragile, when the economy is saturated with shock and the environment is running a fever, that physiological stress doesn't just stay in spreadsheets and climate models.
No, it trickles down.
It filters down into the human nervous system. It fundamentally alters human behavior, which leads us to the fourth domain, social trust.
Right. When the economy is saturated with shock, how do everyday people react?
The source provides a pretty chilling answer.
It leans on data from the 2026 Edelman Trust Barometer, which tracks global trust in institutions, media, and crucially, each other.
And the defining social signal they identify is retreat.
Retreat. The authors argue that we have moved from an era of grievance into an era of insularity.
Grievance to insularity.
That distinction is profound, and we really need to look at the neurobiology of stress to understand why it happens.
Okay, lay it out.
So the human stress response is typically categorized as fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Right.
Grievance is the fight response. If a society is organized around grievance, people are arguing, protesting, and debating fiercely on social media and in the streets.
That's loud.
It is loud and it is messy, but fundamentally the parties are still engaged. They are still in contact, attempting to force the system to metabolize their viewpoint.
Because grievance is friction, but friction requires two objects to be actively touching one another.
Exactly. Insularity, however, is the freeze or flight response.
Pulling away entirely.
Yes. When cognitive load theory is applied to sociology, we see that humans have a finite capacity for processing contradiction. When the sheer volume of instability, economic shocks, climate anxieties, political polarization exceeds a person's cognitive and emotional bandwidth, their psychological defense mechanism is to shut down.
They just can't take any more input.
They pull away, they restrict their inputs to only that which feels completely safe and familiar.
The text highlights a terrifying metric to illustrate this. Globally, 7 out of 10 people report being unwilling or hesitant to trust someone who possesses different values, facts, problem-solving approaches, or cultural backgrounds.
7 out of 10.
70% of the human race.
The authors don't just call this polarization, by the way, because polarization implies two camps at opposite ends of a spectrum fighting each other.
Right, that's the grievance era.
They call this a narrowing of the usable social field.
That phrasing, the usable social field. I want to focus on the specifics of that stat, though. The phrasing, different facts and different problem-solving approaches.
Yeah, that's the key.
Because it's one thing to say, I won't work with you because we have different moral values. That's a tale as old as time.
Sure.
But to say, I won't work with you because we have different problem-solving approaches means the actual mechanics of collaboration have broken down entirely.
It means we can't even sit at the same table.
Right. If I want to fix the local bridge by raising taxes, and you want to fix it by privatizing it, and our response to that disagreement isn't to debate, but to simply refuse to speak to one another,
The bridge falls down.
the bridge falls down. We are losing the bandwidth to even figure out how to fix things together.
It is the total collapse of civic cognition. A complex society requires a massive, resilient social field to operate. We need millions of people with different skills and perspectives to coordinate on infrastructure, supply chains, and environmental policy.
Right.
But as the usable social field narrows down to microscopic echo chambers where people only trust their exact ideological clones, our capacity to execute complex society-wide solutions just evaporates.
It's the ultimate bottleneck. I mean, the physical problems we face, regulating a global AI rollout, managing planetary climate heat, stabilizing the global economy, those demand unprecedented planetary scale coordination.
Yes.
But the social space available to actually organize that coordination is shrinking by the day.
Which brings the authors to the fifth and most philosophical section of the text, the grand paradox.
Beautifully captured by imagining an outsider's perspective.
Right. They attempt to encapsulate this by imagining how an alien anthropologist would evaluate the human species right now.
It's a great thought experiment because it forces you out of your daily anxieties. Imagine you are a scientist studying an ant colony, and you are just objectively recording their behavioral pattern.
This alien anthropologist looks at us and notes a stark, undeniable trend. The human world is increasing its signal density while simultaneously reducing its trust bandwidth.
The text provides a rapid-fire list of juxtapositions to illustrate this, and I think we should dissect the mechanics behind each one.
Definitely. The first one is more data, less shared interpretation.
This is the exact mechanism of the 7 in 10 statistic we just discussed. I mean, we have digitized the entirety of human knowledge. Anyone with a smartphone has access to more raw data than a medieval king.
By orders of magnitude.
Yet the proliferation of data hasn't led to consensus at all. It has fractured reality. Because data, without a trusted institutional framework to verify and contextualize, it just becomes ammunition for insularity.
Everyone just cherry picks the data that confirms their bias.
Exactly. Next juxtaposition. More connection, less contact.
Oh, this one is so relevant.
Think about your own daily life right now. You likely have Slack open for work, Teams for another project, WhatsApp for family, iMessage for friends, and like 3 different social media platforms for networking.
It's exhausting.
The average person processes hundreds of digital pings a day. We have engineered a state of infinite, inescapable connection.
And yet,
global health organizations are formally declaring loneliness a public health epidemic. We've confused the transmission of a signal with the experience of contact.
that's because digital connection is metabolically cheap, while physical, empathetic contact is metabolically expensive.
Oh, wow. Put that way, it makes so much sense.
It requires vulnerability, time, and physical presence to have real contact. When the human system is overloaded, it defaults to the cheap alternative, starving the animal of the actual nutrient of contact.
Metabolic cheapness. That's brilliant. Okay, next. More capability, less absorptive capacity.
We have the capability to deploy an AI model that can map billions of protein structures in a weekend. Incredible capability. But our local zoning boards can't figure out how to permit the electrical upgrades required to run the servers. And our regulatory bodies can't figure out how to legislate the intellectual property rights of the outputs.
Our capability curve has gone vertical. Our absorptive capacity curve is completely flatlined.
Next one. More planetary feedback, less institutional elasticity.
The FAO and WMO are literally giving us real-time feedback. The planet's vascular system is screaming, the crops are failing.
But our institutions, the shock-saturated economies, and the gridlocked parliaments have zero elasticity to stretch and adapt to that feedback.
They're too busy fighting over different problem-solving approaches.
Exactly. And the final juxtaposition, which might be the most profound insight in the entire deep dive. More tools, less patience for the conditions under which tools become wisdom.
Man, that line stops you in your tracks. More tools, less patience for the conditions under which tools become wisdom.
It's incredibly profound.
Because a tool only executes a function, right? An algorithm is just a tool, it finds a pattern. But wisdom is knowing why to use the tool, when to leave it in a box, and understanding the second and third order consequences of using it on a human population.
And wisdom requires time.
It requires historical reflection, it requires digestion, and we have engineered a society that punishes any delay in execution.
If you aren't deploying the tool immediately, you're falling behind. That's the mindset.
So the alien anthropologist observes this and sees the tragic comedy of our species. As the authors state, we are building systems that require planetary scale coordination while emotionally retreating into smaller circles of trust.
It's completely backward.
We are building global AI architectures and global supply chains, but we only want to interact with the 5 people in our neighborhood who vote exactly the same way we do. We are trying to run a globalized physical reality on a tribalized social reality.
Furthermore, we are accelerating machine cognition while struggling to maintain basic civic cognition. We're spending billions to make the computers hallucinate less, while our own populations are increasingly hallucinating alternate political realities because they have lost the ability to speak to one another.
But the sentence that really acts as the thesis statement for this entire source document, the one that perfectly summarizes the metabolic mismatch, is this. The alien anthropologist sees us narrating the future as innovation, while much of the body, human and planetary, is asking for digestion.
Narrating the future as innovation.
Right.
I mean, look at any corporate press release today, any political stump speech, any venture capital pitch. The narrative is always forward momentum.
Move fast, break things.
Disrupt the legacy industry, build the next generation model. We are addicted to the rhetoric of acceleration.
Because innovation sounds exciting. It implies progress and mastery. But what this text is aggressively arguing is that constant, relentless innovation without corresponding periods of integration is literally toxic.
It kills the host.
The planet's biological body, the economic vascular system, the social fabric, they are all begging for a minute to just sit down, rest, and digest the massive structural changes we have introduced over the last 20 years.
Going back to your Thanksgiving analogy, if you eat that massive dinner in 5 minutes and your stomach is in agony, the solution is not to innovate a new, more efficient way to eat a second turkey.
Right.
The solution is to stop eating. You have to lie on the couch and let your physiological systems process the caloric load.
But global capitalism doesn't have a couch.
No, it doesn't. The incentive structures demand that we just keep serving more turkeys.
So if the diagnosis is this stark, if constant innovation is making the host sick and our social and economic buffer zones are completely depleted, where is the viable path forward?
That's the golden question.
Does the source material offer any kind of pragmatic way out of this? Or is it merely a brilliantly articulated document of inevitable doom?
Thankfully, it actively avoids the trap of doom by searching for what it calls a faint opening.
A faint opening.
Okay. And what is most surprising and perhaps most challenging for modern readers is that the authors explicitly state this opening is not technological.
Which flies in the face of our dominant cultural reflex. I mean, whenever we face a systemic crisis, the immediate, almost Pavlovian response is, let's engineer our way out.
Always. Climate change. Build giant carbon capture vacuums.
Trust deficit. Build a blockchain to verify truth.
Exactly. But the text argues that you cannot technologically innovate your way out of a digestion problem. Applying more technological velocity to a system suffering from metabolic mismatch only accelerates the failure.
It's feeding more turkey to the sick patient.
Right. Instead, the authors locate this faint opening in the relational sphere. They call for the cultivation of absorption practices.
Absorption practices. Let's translate that into actual operational behavior. What does an absorption practice look like in the real world?
The text offers several concrete examples. First, it highlights the necessity of slower groups.
Slower groups.
Imagine organizations, civic bodies, or even corporate divisions that deliberately and structurally refuse to operate at the frantic speed of the internet. They optimize for thoroughness, historical context, and deep consensus rather than immediate reaction and quarterly returns.
It's the institutional equivalent of chewing your food.
That's exactly what it is.
And what about the social field? How do we fix the 7 and 10 trust deficit?
The authors point to local trust brokering. Rather than trying to establish global consensus on a highly polarized digital platform, which is mathematically impossible, given the signal density, you focus your metabolic energy entirely on building deep, unshakable trust in your immediate physical community.
You rebuild the usable social field from the neighborhood up, rather than the internet down.
Exactly. Re-establish contact over connection.
There's also a fascinating point in the text regarding how we interact with technology itself, right?
Yeah.
It mentions the need for human-AI companionship that does not amplify panic.
Yes. This goes directly to the heart of algorithmic design. Currently, social media algorithms and many AI interfaces are optimized for engagement.
And from a neurobiological standpoint, the fastest way to generate engagement is to trigger the amygdala.
Right. To amplify outrage, fear, or existential threat, those emotions metabolize instantly.
They're junk food.
Total junk food. The text suggests that if we're going to integrate AI into our daily lives, it must be designed to calm the nervous system. It should act as a synthesizer of complexity, helping us process information logically rather than just throwing a higher volume of terrifying data at us.
It's the difference between an AI that constantly pushes notifications about every geopolitical disaster on Earth, keeping you in a state of perpetual shock,
Versus an AI that helps you filter the noise and focus on the actionable data relevant to your local community.
Right. Furthermore, the text calls for civic spaces to rebuild interpretation. We don't need more spaces to share raw data. We need dedicated physical spaces where people with different problem-solving approaches can sit face-to-face and do the hard, slow work of agreeing on what the data actually means.
And crucially, regarding the physical infrastructure, the authors call for energy systems designed for resilience rather than spectacle.
That is a direct critique of the $400 billion data center build-out.
It absolutely is. Building a resilient, decentralized local microgrid that can keep a hospital running during a climate-induced heat wave is a metabolic necessity.
Straining that same grid to power a hyperscale data center so that millions of users can instantly generate 4K video of artificial landscapes is a metabolic spectacle.
One aids digestion, the other causes indigestion.
The final absorption practice the text highlights is actually what we're attempting to model on this show right now. They call it field reading as a counter-move to reaction.
This is a vital psychological tool. When you are in a state of reaction, your worldview is entirely dictated by whatever headline or crisis is immediately in front of your face.
You are swatting at flies. You are exhausted.
But field reading is the act of stepping back and observing the underlying physics of the board.
Okay, so seeing the bigger picture.
Right. When you master field reading, you start to recognize the pattern of the metabolic mismatch everywhere. You see a story about a massive new semiconductor plant draining a local reservoir.
And then you see a story about a spike in localized political extremism in that same town.
And then you see a story about a supply chain bottleneck.
Instead of panicking over 3 separate terrifying events, field reading allows you to say, I see the systemic pressure. I recognize the structural inability to digest. I understand the signal.
Exactly. Field reading transitions you from a state of grievance and panic into a state of structural awareness. It lowers your cognitive load.
Now, after outlining all of this, the modern reader is usually waiting for the bulleted 3-step action plan to save the world.
Of course. That's how we're trained to read these things.
But the authors do something much wiser and, frankly, much more honest. The text explicitly states that it is too early to ask the question, what should we do?
Which, as someone who loves to solve problems, is deeply frustrating to read.
It is. But the more you sit with it, the more you realize it's the only logical conclusion. If the problem is that we are moving too fast to digest reality, demanding an immediate action-oriented solution is just a symptom of the disease.
It's demanding more unmetabolized action, more innovation, more noise.
Precisely. We cannot act our way out of condition caused by hyperaction.
Instead, the authors posit that the only cleaner question for our current moment is this: what can still absorb reality without hardening against it?
What can still absorb reality without hardening against it? That is a haunting, beautiful question.
It requires us to look very closely at our own psychological defenses. Because when we face the sheer, overwhelming reality of planetary climate strain, shock-saturated economies, and the collapse of the usable social field, hardening against it is the default human response.
Hardening is exactly what the Edelman Trust Barometer quantified. The 7 in 10 people who refuse to engage with differing viewpoints have hardened.
Hardening is cynicism. It is denial. It is building a psychological bunker where you only consume media that validates your pre-existing worldview and demonizes everyone else.
And a hardened surface, by the laws of physics, cannot absorb anything. The data, the empathy, the nuance, it all just bounces off.
A hardened social infrastructure cannot absorb a drop of complex reality.
But what does it actually look like to absorb reality?
Well, it looks like profound resilience. It looks like the deliberate choice to cultivate the patience required for wisdom, even when the market demands immediate capability.
Right.
It looks like maintaining your civic cognition, forcing yourself to stay in the room and engage with your neighbor, even when you violently disagree on the problem-solving approach.
So to absorb reality means keeping your intellectual and emotional surface soft enough and open enough to actually metabolize the pain, the friction, and the complexity of the world, rather than deflecting it with grievance or hiding from it in insularity.
It is the ultimate test of our era. Can we stay open? Can we actually digest the world we have built?
That is the signal we must tune into. We have to look past the blinding noise of the daily crisis, the spectacular technological unveilings, and the geopolitical theater, and listen to the deeper, quieter frequency of our own absorptive capacity.
Beautifully said.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to turn directly to you listening right now. We have covered massive planetary scale systems today. We've talked about hundreds of billions of dollars in capital expenditure, the thermodynamic limits of the Earth, and the shifting behavior of billions of people.
It is a lot to take in.
It is incredibly easy to feel small, powerless, and overwhelmed in the face of that macro reality. But I want to leave you with a new paradigm, to ponder something that builds on the profound insights of this text, but brings the application right down to your daily life, your living room, your phone screen.
Yeah, bringing it back to the individual metabolism.
Exactly. If our primary, undeniable societal need right now is not innovation, but digestion, what happens if you start treating your daily consumption of news, data, and social media exactly like eating a physical meal?
I love that framing.
Think about the mechanics of that. You would never eat nonstop from the exact moment you wake up until the moment you close your eyes at night.
No, your body would rebel. You would be violently ill.
Yet psychologically, that is
Yeah.
exactly how we treat our information diets. We scroll the moment we open our eyes. We listen to podcasts at 2x speed while commuting. We read the news while eating lunch. We check social media while watching television.
We are relentlessly force-feeding our minds without a single moment of digestive pause.
So, my challenge to you is to locate your own metabolic limit. At what point today will you recognize your own intellectual fullness? How will you know when your personal absorption layer is maxed out, when the sponge can't take another drop?
That's such an important question to ask yourself.
Instead of blindly taking another bite of the newsfeed tonight out of habit or anxiety, what would it actually look like to actively schedule time to sit, to rest, and to extract the nutrients from what you've already consumed today?
Just let the system process it.
This week, we challenge you to prioritize digestion over innovation in your own life. Stop scrolling for a moment, let your mind process the complexity of the world around you, and see if you can practice absorbing reality without hardening against it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.